Good evening. Welcome to Reality Check. On the program tonight, Walmart wraps up the acquisition of the Indian e-commerce major Flipkart for $16 billion, a deal that transforms the e-commerce space in our country. Now, Amazon, which is the dominant player in India, will face renewed competition from a franchise, Walmart, which is a $500 billion American giant. Equally smaller e-commerce players in India could be dwarfed and cease to exist if Walmart Flipkart were to undercut them. What is this transaction, the world's biggest e-commerce deal, mean? That's on Reality Check tonight. Joining us, Gurcharan Das, author of India Grows at Night and the former CEO of Procter & Gamble. With me in the studio, Satish Meena, thanks very much for being with us, senior forecast analyst with Forrester, and Saurav Srivastava, the former chairman of NASSCOM, with us as well. Thanks very much, sir, for being with us. Mr. Das, let me come to you first. Let's begin by keeping it simple. For millions of consumers across this country, what does it mean to have Walmart entering the space with Flipkart?
Well, I will say to you that this is, as an Indian, I feel very good about this. And I have 5 reasons. One you've already given, which is that it will create competition. Flipkart was going to die. Amazon was going to take over, and now at least we will have two major, the consumer will have two major players. Competition is good, monopoly is bad. The second reason is what most people have not appreciated, that this is going to be transformative for many of India's farmers. That Walmart's DNA and its competitive edge over Amazon lies in the fact that it has created a cold chain all over the world, and it knows how to take fresh food from the farm to the consumer. And so what we are going to see now is a play where, and this has happened in country after country. I've looked at Walmart in China, in Philippines, in Indonesia, and farmers have been the biggest gainers. For example, you know, today you buy tomatoes at 20 rupees a kilo, but the farmer in India only gets 4 or 5 rupees. The rest of it goes in the chain,
Yes.
from the mandi, through the artiya, wholesaler, retailer, rediwala, etc. When somebody like Walmart in Philippines buys those same tomatoes, they come for, the farmer gets 8 or 10 rupees.
Right.
And the consumer pays only 15 rupees because there isn't that big middleman chain. And so that I was hoping that Reliance Fresh would be able to create that chain, but it did not happen.
Right.
So and the third thing is the retailer will gain. Oddly enough, it was the last government agreed to bring in multi-brand retail, but this government balked because of the retailers. Walmart has struck a very clever deal. For the last 5 years, they've been operating with retailers, and they sell to retailers in many states, and they will use those retailers as their points of delivery. And so there's a partnership with retailers which takes a sting away from the retailers.
Okay, one second, sir. I just want to bring in some
startups.
I just want to bring in some other voices as well.
I just want to finish quickly.
So I'll come back to you. We've got time.
Let me quickly finish.
Sir, just one sec. I just want to go across to my other panelists. I will come back to you. We do have a lot of time. Mr. Srivastava, you know, one of the areas of concern which has been raised is that if you're a small e-commerce player in India, and you have to now, you've had to encounter an Amazon, you've had to encounter a Flipkart, and now you've got Walmart coming in such a big way, they'll be bringing in perhaps $5 billion in terms of investment into Flipkart. Then as a small Indian startup or a small Indian e-commerce player, you will never be able to undercut a Walmart Flipkart, and that's going to be a problem. India's presence in this space might disappear.
Well, I think if you look at what's happened in the space, you've always had the Flipkart and then there was a Snap deal. they were dominant in Indian terms, but you had a number of Indian startups that came up in e-commerce, but they all had very good niche models. The ones that were just me too, just like in IT services, take a leaf out of there. You have the big players, but you have a number of smaller companies that are operating in their own niches with their specializations, and they're thriving. Today, many of them are growing at in excess of 50%, particularly in the digital space, whereas the TCS and Infosys and Wipros are struggling to grow in double digits. So I don't think that would disappear. In fact, there might be even more action in that space, because now many of them will find that down the road they have more than one large player that might actually give exit to their investors. So you may see a lot more innovation.
Right.
I do think.
Yep.
So I don't think that necessarily true, but the other point I wanted to make is we are seeing it in a very linear way. It's not clear to me that commerce in India, in retailing, will work exactly the way it has worked in the US. In India, you will have e-commerce, it will grow faster than normal retail, but you have to worry whether clicks and bricks will be a model that will play out very differently in India. And I would give you the example of InfoEdge and Naukri, which has had huge competition from big global majors in the job search space. Not only has it held its own,
Yes.
it's actually now got 70% market share. And
Right.
simply because it's on the net, it has feet on the street.
Right.
And in India, the large retailers will have different models. So I think the Indian space will play out differently.
I just want to go across to Satish. Satish, is there, if you look at it from another standpoint, a sense of worry that, look, here was Flipkart, one of the Bansals will now actually be exiting completely. This was an Indian company. There were two young Indians with a great idea. They started really small. They were actually packaging their own products, in their warehouses. Then they got quite wealthy in terms of investment in the company. SoftBank came in a very big way. And there was a real dream. They seemed to be absolutely unstoppable. Then, of course, there was incredible competition, and they obviously felt the pinch. But now, they will no longer be the majority stakeholders. They will not have that same presence which they did. Flipkart, of course, will exist. Is there a sense of disappointment about what, at the end of the day, an Indian e-commerce player can actually achieve?
So there are two things. One is our regulations don't allow founders to have differential shareholding. So that's something which is even if they wanted, they could not have done a Flipkart for them. So that's something the government has to work on in terms of how to improve the regulations, so that founders can still take hold of the company and still raise funding, because we require a lot of capital and local capital is not available as of now. So we need a lot of foreign capital, and the only way is to dilute the equity, and in that process the founders end up at a place where they no longer control the company. So that's something the government has to work out, how they can assure this thing, or how to change the regulations or support these companies. Second thing is, it's not about online retail. Now, the differentiation between online and offline is very limited.
It's just retail.
Yeah, it's just retail. So if the government talks about policy for e-commerce or online retail, it does not make sense. They need to have integrated policy for retail. And that's something which will help the organized retailers, because now this combination is going to hurt more than the unorganized retailers, than like the Shoppers Stops or those companies. And they will come back and say that, these companies have access to unlimited capital now, and you have tied back our hands. We can't raise money.
Right.
And ultimately, if you see how Shoppers Stops footfall in the last 3 years, they're not growing. They're almost stagnant. So they will come back and say, allow us to raise funds, or make integrated policy, which is again a need the government which should listen to all the retailers which have.
Mr. Das, how is this really important for Walmart as well? Because, when it comes to their own presence in the United States, they face a great deal of competition from Amazon. So, some people would say that their home turf in the United States is actually been threatened by Amazon. And yet they've chosen to come over here, invest in this big way. Is it because they see India as the future, particularly since their home turf is being threatened?
This is an excellent point that you have made. In fact, Walmart has said privately that India represents their world test market, that the world markets for big boxes like Walmart are changing. And in fact, last week, they sold their business in the UK, partly
Right.
to pay for this $16 billion that they are investing in India. And so they see India really as as what the future of retailing is going to be. And you know, I was just going to make the point about to make a comment about what the previous speaker
Yes.
was saying, that we should not really, we live in a global world, and the job of governments is to protect the interests of its consumers and its citizens. That means it's citizens of cities and farmers. And we should not worry if an Indian company is bought over by a global company. In fact, it becomes a model for the startups of the future who say, oh my God, I can get one day $16 billion, you know, for my company. They become a role. It's a role model.
Right.
And so I think that what it will do for the citizens of India will be so much greater. And good governments look after the interests of the consumers and farmers. And let me also add one more thing here.
Yep.
That the jobs, you know, we've been worried in India about jobs. And there was a calculation made that if this Walmart model, which is going to work with retailers, it's going to work with farmers, it's going to work with logistics, cold chain, it could produce as much as 10 million jobs over the next 10 years.
Yep.
In other words, I'm not saying this will happen right away. No, it will take time. But it is this type of disruption
Yes.
that India needs. A young country, even if you're, you know, Doug McMillan, who is the CEO of Walmart, began as a delivery boy
Yes.
at Walmart.
Yes.
So let's take that as an inspiration, that you can, what it will do for Indian retail
Yeah.
is that it will create these shop-in-shops, which Walmart will control the quality of the products, the way the information system works at your mom and pop store, you know, at the Kirana shop, and it will upgrade the quality of the employees, of the people at Walmart.
Okay,
And that's why I think
Yep.
that now there will be fighting. I mean, vested interests. A lot of states will not allow Walmart because they have the APMC law, which are basically wholesaler cartels of Aratiyas.
Yes.
They don't want to lose their money. And this is the money that funds,
that
black
battle,
money
in
that
fact,
funds
is,
political elections.
No, sir, I just wanted, I take your point completely that, you know, I mean, this is a huge step in the e-commerce space, but, you know, there would be struggles ahead perhaps. But I just want to go back to Mr. Srivastava for a moment. You know, if you look at the numbers, Mr. Srivastava, India's total consumption is expected to rise to $3.6 trillion in 2027, up from $1.3 trillion in 2026. And you know, when we talk about retail, one shouldn't necessarily just limit it to e-commerce or other retail. It's retail altogether. Which is why my question is this, sir. Do we sometimes hype the e-commerce space? Because if you look at it, e-commerce, access to broadband, access to a smartphone, access to the ability to retail electronically is still limited in our country. It's something which people can do in many cities, but there are still large parts of our country where the lack of bandwidth, it's a very basic limitation, means that e-commerce is still a dream. Is that something we need to overcome before we hype e-commerce beyond what we are doing now? Mr. Srivastava.
Yeah, well, let me answer this question. It's very much what I said earlier. I think you have to look at retailing in India as a combination of both what happens on the net, what happens on the ground. It is going to be like that for a very long time, and the winner in India will be one that has the optimal strategy of how they are going to leverage these different channels in the best possible way. And that's why I think a Walmart Flipkart marriage may be much more adept at figuring out how the optimum model for India is going to work. I do want to make a comment on what the earlier speaker had said about the founders not being in control. Well, the founders were not in control well before Walmart came in. They owned just barely 10% of the company. 90% of it was in any case owned by investors overseas, and that's fine because we need the capital for companies to grow, for employment to be created, wealth to be created. And I think it's a fantastic precedence for founders to know that they can build big companies and create a lot of wealth. It's great for overseas investors to know they can come to India and invest and actually get very good return on their capital.
Right.
I think all the messages that go out from this are excellent. And boy, this is fantastic for Indian consumers.
Yeah.
So I would say we should get away from this fixation on what stake do the founders have, because in any country, by the time this big a deal is done, the founders don't have a lot of stake.
Right.
They may stay in control of running the company if indeed the investors feel that they're the best to be running the company. But
they
never have controlling stakes at this point in time.
Sure. Satish, one final question to you. Is the taxman going to be having the last laugh in this? Because there's capital gains, and with one of the Bansals having sold off his stake, at both the Bansals, not brothers, both the Bansals having sold off their stake, and others as well. Isn't capital gains a real, something that could bring the taxman more thousands of crores?
I think yes, and both Walmart and other stakeholders which have sold their stakes, they might have considered this. So that should not be a problem. They already have taken this in account. And to be fair to Walmart, they are in urgency. So they wanted to close the deal very soon, and that's why the premium is there, and the taxation part should be taken care by the tax department. I am not assuming that they will face issues like Vodafone or something like that this time, because the transition should be smooth, and the government has already said somewhere that they don't see any problem with this deal, so that should not be a problem.
And another winner in this is SoftBank. It's a clean exit for them. They'd put in a lot of money into a franchise which was having problems, but it's a clean exit for them and a profitable one at that.
Both SoftBank and Tiger, because Tiger, when Kalyan came, Flipkart is in a situation that everyone is saying that now Amazon will take over the market share and everything, but in last 1.5 years after entry of Kalyan, they kind of gained market share at the same time and also maintained market share in some of the categories like fashion. So both of them are getting very good exit along with the other investors. SoftBank might wanted to hold it for a longer period of time, but they will be happy in terms of the gains.
This came at a fairly right time for them.
Yes. It's just 6 months and you are getting almost 60% return, so it's a very fair deal for them.
Fair deal. I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us. I think there is an overwhelming sense of optimism at this stage about what this means for people across the country. And I think the point that Mr. Das was talking about how in the future the agriculture sector could be transformed as a result of the entry of companies like Walmart is something we're going to have to look at very, very closely. I'd like to thank all of you very much for being with us.